Yeah, so he was born in September 1920 and he passed away October the 7th in the year 2013. He was also known as Maran, a great rabbi. He was a great chacham. He was a posek, a rabbi that would render different Jewish laws. He was the Sephardic chief rabbi for many years of Israel, 10 years plus, and was known as the Gadol Israel, the great one of Israel. And let's say he was regarded as one of the most influential Sephardic religious authorities, you could actually say, of all time. That's how great he happened to have actually been, and many people would have held it. He is also the founder of the famous Shas political party. I think it's a party that currently boasts about 9 or 10 seats in the Knesset, if I'm not mistaken. So that it's very, very interesting and something that we have to point out. Rabbi Ovadya Yosef's various different response is highly regarded within regards to especially the ultra-Orthodox circles, especially among the Mizrahi communities. And let's explore a few of the highlights of the great rabbi's life. Much is related about him in various different languages. That's the first thing we have to bring about, respectively. Gimel Cheshvan, the 3rd of Cheshvan, which happens to be this week, marks the great rabbi's Hilula. That's the first thing I would point out within regards to that. So it was the head of the Mifleget Shas, as they say. So he was born in the city of Baghdad. It was British-occupied Iraq, we have to point at that point in time. His father was Yaakov ben Ovadya, and his wife and his mother happened to be Gorgia, I believe. So I think when he was 4 years of age in 1924, he would immigrate to Jerusalem, mandatory Palestine, with his family over there, and there he would adopt the family name Ovadya, and later in life he would change his last name to his middle name, Yosef, to avoid the confusion of being called Ovadya. That's what's reported over. Now, the family would settle in the neighborhood in Jerusalem called Beit Yisrael, House of Israel, where I think the family itself, operated a grocery store. It was tough times for many people at that stage in time, wealth-wise, and he would be working, and it's interesting, there's a famous story once within regards to how the Rosh Yeshiva would petition his father to ensure he would be in attendance and not miss any, let's say, yeshivot learning, respectively. He learned in a Talmud Torah called Bnei Tzion in the Baharian Quarter, where they were studying Torah over there, and really he would start really writing commentaries, I think, on the Reshit Chochmah when he was just 9 years of age. Let's just say himself penned, where he would pen in different things in the margins. And the Reshit Chochmah is a famous book written by the great scholar Rabbi Eliyahu Vidas, I think largely based on Zohar. Its name translates into the beginning of wisdom, let's just say, in of itself. So that's the first thing we have to point out. Let's speak a bit about the famous Bnei Tzion school. We actually recorded a video, if you can recollect, within regards to the famous school on various occasions before. There were many great students that learned there. First of all, it was based in the Bukhari neighborhood. I think, it was actually established through the famous Rabbi Avram Aminov Talmudi, who I think very, very great rabbi he was. Maybe it was around the year 1894, respectively. They had, let's just say, an all-star lineup of great rabbis that were Talmidim and involved with the yeshiva. Especially, let's go among them, not just Chacham Ovadya Yosef, Rabbi Ben Zion Abba Shaul will learn there, Rabbi Naim Ben Eliyahu, Rabbi Yehuda Moalem, Rabbi David Tzadka, another one of the great rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda Tzadka, who was a Rosh Yeshiva of Parat Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Shraga, another great rabbi, I think from the Persian community, respectively, Rabbi Eliyahu Shrimp, another famous Rosh Yeshiva and the founder of the Torah of Hora'ah, I think in Tel Aviv, Rabbi Shalom Kohen, who was most recently Shas spiritual leader. He passed about just over 3 years ago. Rabbi Moshe Tzadka is currently the Rosh Yeshiva of Parat Yosef. He was a Talmid there. Rabbi Shimon Elitov, another great rabbi, I think a very, very famous rabbi in himself. And the Chacham Yaakov Yosef, the son of Rabbi Ovadya Yosef, he was actually the Rosh Yeshiva of Chazon Ovadya, most notably. So that was a very, very famous yeshiva in of itself. And B'tzavata Musad Kino Am Melamdim, Yosef Chaim Shirabani, for example, would be there. It would later on become a ram in the Yeshivat Parat Yosef. Shlomo Ma'aravi, Rav Shaul Sharabani, another great rabbi. Chaim Shvili, Yaakov Bloy, various different great rabbis we have to point out. Benjamin Gorgi, for example, and Yitzhak Rosenthal, and so on and so forth. So Bnei Tzion was a famous, let's say, Talmudic academy. Without that, younger schools place, and many of the great rabbis would actually be nurtured there, let's just say, and really, really get imbued, and the brilliance will come about at that stage in time. Okay, so let's continue over here. So I think it was around 1933, the great Rabbi Tzadka Chutzin would speak to Yaakov and encourage him to send his son to Yeshivat Porat Yosef, where he'd quite quickly, advance the highest shir taught by the Rosh Yeshiva, Ezra Atin. Now, Rav Tzadka Chutzin, we spoke about him. He was a famous judge, Sephardic judge, spiritual leader of the Iraqi Jewish community in both in Iraq and Israel, and taught thousands of students in Baghdad. And he was founder of the Rosh Mitivta of the Shemet Tzadka synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, also most notably. Now, Rav Ezra Atia would become the Rosh Yeshiva. He was Rosh Yeshiva of Porat Yosef. Remember, he was, I think, for as many as 45 years, nurturing thousands of students, let's just say, and really bringing many great rabbis into great Sephardic leadership in himself. It's another great rabbi we've spoken about on this series extensively, Rabbi Ezra Atia, and I recommend everyone to watch those videos that were recorded in regards to the great rabbi. So he would be over there. And I think Rabbi Ovadya Yosef would compose his first sefer together with, I think, two friends. It was called the Machberet Ha'atakat Hidot, this was. Then I think come the year 1937, another famous rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Dweck, sent Rabbi Ovadya Yosef to give the daily Ben Ishchai Halachah in the Ohel Rachel synagogue for the Persian Jewish community in the Beit Yisrael neighborhood. And in the course of giving the shir, very, very interesting, he would bring about various different opinions of Ben Shai and speak about the other great rabbis like Rav Yosef Karo, the Arizal, Rabbi Arya Luria, and great rabbis in of itself. And he would really, really at that point in time be in the let's just say, like center stage of that thing, with huge, vast audiences, and from a diverse range in himself, people listening to him, and many of them followers of other rabbis. But at that point in time, it was now a number of notable rabbis. Among them, let's just say, would speak, give feedback with regards to shirim. He gave over various different halachic shirim and so on and so forth. One rabbi that was very central at that point in time was a famous Rabbi Yitzchak Nisim, who was going to become a Rishon LeZion and the chief rabbi of Israel. I think he lived between 1896 to 1981, so he was already a generation older than him, let's just say, in of itself. And he was a chief rabbi, I believe, between the years 1955 to 1972. Who would take over. It's actually interesting. Rabbi Ovadya Yosef would later on succeed him as the chief rabbi, and he would actually succeed Rabbi Ben Zion Uziel, another famous chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, but let's continue over here. So, that's interesting. Rabbi Ovadya Yosef would receive a rabbinic ordination at the age of 20 and became a long-time friend of several members of his class who went on to become prominent leaders in the Sephardi world, especially Rabbi Ben Zion Abashul, Rabbi Baruch Ben Hayim, another great rabbi who was the chief rabbi of the Syrian Jewish community for 55 years in Brooklyn, and was also an educator in Magen David Yeshiva and also Sharei Tzion Torah Center, interesting enough. And also Rabbi Yehuda Moalem, another great rabbi, Rabbi Tzion Levi, who was also another long tenure he would have, was 57 years, I think, the chief rabbi of Panama, which is amazing. And he built up, Rabbi Tzion Rachamim Halevi, a Jewish community of 6,000 to 7,000 observant Jews in a country of only 3 million people. So this is very, very interesting in of itself. Okay, so let's continue over here. Now, he would reside in Egypt. So, so much can be said in his life. What happened in the first 20 years, let's just say, first years of his life, especially till 1947 when he went to Egypt, huge amounts actually occurred, and much more can be said. We're just trying to get just a short breadth within regards to some of the famous rabbis of that stage in time. So that's very, very interesting. Now, let's just backtrack. We're going to talk about his time in Egypt in a minute. But he was ordained to rabbinate only at 20. In 1945 to 1947, he would serve as the Sephardic community's court in Jerusalem, and he would have various different halachic understanding, let's say, had been established at that point in time, answering questions that were directed to him from the Sephardic rabbinical and Dayan circles, the judge circles in Israel and the diaspora. As well, many Ashkenazim would come to him asking him she'elot. Now, he would get married. His wife's name was Margaret, Rabbinit Margaret, and very, very interesting. She was a great tzaddiket. She was a daughter of Rabbi Avram Halevi Fatal, another great rabbi. So I think he himself happened to have been immigrant from Halab, if I'm not mistaken. So that's much can be said within regards to that. We actually did record a video, if I'm not mistaken, about him. About his father, Rav Fatal, I think about a year ago or something, it happened to have been. So that's something that I would recommend everyone to look back on without a doubt. Yeah, so he was, I think actually, Hachatzunait Kaima, the Bet Sefer Spitzer, it was actually inside the Spitzer synagogue, if I'm not mistaken. Shishchen Bebeit Yudi, Yehudiaf Chafetz. Okay, so this was, let's say, the Armon Shel Moshiach. It was, well, I think another famous place in Israel in of itself, respectively. Let's just speak about it. I think that's where the wedding was, and yeah, it was, I think, a palace in of itself, the palace of Moshiach, the Beit Yehudiyof. I think it was a building that was built between 1905 to 1914 in Jerusalem, in the Bukharian neighborhood on Ezra Street. I think it's now a National Heritage Site, if I'm not mistaken. It's a place I think we visited on this channel over here while we've been touring around Jerusalem, another famous place in itself. So that is something that we actually have to point over there, and many let's say special events actually occurred in that destination. So yeah, they would live in Jerusalem, I think, initially, as we stated before. And now he would go to Egypt, I believe, come what the year 1947. He would arrive in Egypt, in Cairo. He was invited by Rabbi Aaron Shuaika. I think we've mentioned him also before here inside this series on various occasions over there. Aaron Shuaika, let's just say something about him. He was a Rosh Hashiva and a Darshan, I think, he was from Syria, if I'm not mistaken. Also was a great rabbi in Egypt and in Israel. And I think part of the neighborhood called the Moaz Aviv, if I'm not mistaken, and was part of Rabbanot in Tel Aviv, respectively. So he was over there at that stage in time. So in Yeshiva, Rabbi Yosef, I think, would serve over there at the request of Rabbi Ben Zion Meir Chai Uziel as the head of the Cairo Bet Din, the rabbinical court over there. And he saw that maybe the religious observance itself was more on the maybe a slightly weaker side than it should be in Egypt and the Jewish community at large. And yeah, very, very interesting. So he would try and make more of an organizer system of kashrut, let's just say. And yeah, very, very important. Really try to mitchazek the community at that point in time, and really do his best to strengthen at that stage of time. Much is actually chronicled over within regards to that point. Especially that specific era in of itself. You know, I think we went to his library, Rabbi Ovadya Yosef's library, and you can see some of the letters he actually wrote and corresponded at the time when he was in Egypt. And his experiences, I think, in Egypt reported over will greatly influence him and his reflections in his rulings, in his sermons, let's just say. And yeah, so that's very, very interesting. So, but I think shortly afterwards, he didn't spend too long in Egypt. I think it was a maximum couple of years. I'm not sure the exact time period itself. He would come back to Israel and he would then study at the Midrash called the Bnei Tzion, that was headed at that stage in time by Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank, another famous, renowned halachic scholar, and he would serve as the chief rabbi of Jerusalem for several decades. I believe the Ashkenazic chief rabbi. He would also serve in the rabbinical court when he came back to Israel in Petach Tikva. In his first term as a Dayan, he was only 30 years of age. He wrote various different halachic rulings, famous ones, let's say, within regards to realm of Yibum and Halitza. And yeah, he really become famous. Come what 1951, 1952, he would publish his first halacha sefer. He was about 31, 32 years of age. It was called Chazon Ovadya, which was concentrating on the laws of Pesach, Passover. The book would win huge, lavish praise and approval of the two chief rabbis of Israel, both Rabbi Ben Zion Meir Chai Uziel and Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi Herzog. Rabbi Herzog was also another great rabbi. He was Ashkenazic rabbi at that point in time, chief rabbi of British Mandate of Palestine, respectively. And now 2 years afterwards, he would found the Or HaTorah Yeshiva for gifted Sephardic yeshiva students. This yeshiva, I think, was open for a window of time. It was one of the first of many he would be established. I don't know if it is still currently running. I think it was a window of time was open. And he was able to facilitate, let's say, Torah education for Sephardic Jews at a much more higher level in order to provide leadership for the community in future generations. 1953, 1954, 1955, 1956. See, he published the first two volumes of his major work, the Yabia Omer, which would, receive huge, lavish praise from many people. Come on, 1958 to 1965, he's between 38 to 45 years of age. He would serve as a judge in the Jerusalem district Bet Din over there. He was then appointed to the Supreme Rabbinical Court of Appeals in Jerusalem. Eventually would become the Sephardic chief rabbi of Tel Aviv in 1968, which was a position he would hold until his election as the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel. That was in 1972. So at that stage in time, he would be about 52 years of age, respectively. So he was taking on various different roles over there at that point in time, and really garnering and gaining huge amounts of experience with all the, let's just say, the undertakings he was doing. Okay, so he would come to it, the time period where he will become the Rishon LeZion, the chief rabbi of Israel. Now, so much can be said over here. This could be done, this video, just say on its own in several parts, because there's so much to speak about. He was elected there, and he would replace Rabbi Yitzchak Nissim. And very, very interesting. So I think in the same election, Rabbi Shlomo Goren was chosen as Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Israel. And I think the chief rabbinate council itself was controlled by Rabbi Goren. And that's very, very interesting. Now, he'll make his way, obviously he'll spend, I think, 10 or 11 years until 1983 as a chief rabbi. And 1984, after his chief rabbi role, that would see him entering the realms of politics at that certain time. 1984 will be the year where he would found the famous Shas political party, which I think currently boasts approximately around 10 seats inside the Knesset. Very interesting. So he would, that would be, let's just say, very, very important position he would have. And he felt that there was a minimal representation of Sephardic Jews in Ashkenazic, as he dominated Agudat Yisrael political party. And he thought, there has to be much more of a role for the Sephardic community over there. And it would absolutely succeed. I think at one stage in time, there was either 17 or 19 seats they will actually get, which is absolutely phenomenal. Remember, he was chief rabbi of Tel Aviv also, if I'm not mistaken, in 1968. So there was no... all these experiences now to start a political party would have been much more easier, let's just say, because he had experience both as chief rabbi of various cities and also of Israel. So it really did come in. So let's just talk about that a little bit more. So very interesting. He was probably by that stage in time probably the most famous rabbi in Israel, you could say, and the amounts he did during those years, especially while he was chief rabbi, was absolutely phenomenal. So he become, I think it was the 11th Knesset where the Shas political party was established, if I'm not mistaken. And very interesting. So he would really become famous at that point in time. And there was much encouragement for the political party. And I think they would start booming come what, I think, especially in one of the elections. They would have as many as about 19 seats, as I said before, possibly even more, but I'll have to double check on that. So that's very interesting. So, but I think most of the time he being the founder over there, he would take sometimes less active roles in politics, but remain the party's spiritual leader until he passed away. So at a later time, he would take a backseat, let's just say, in a political time period. I think there was an assassination plot, if I'm not mistaken, April 2005. It's reported over here on Wikipedia. Israeli security services had arrested 3 people whom the Shin Bet claimed were members of the Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine, and they tried to, I think, take Rabbi Ovadya's life, if I'm not mistaken, and that was very much documented at that point in time. Now his family. Now, when he was 24 years of age, we said that he married Rabbinit Margalit Fatal. She was born in the year 1927 and passed away in 1994. I think born in Syria, if I'm not mistaken. And I think they would have 11 children. Now, the first one was, if I'm not mistaken, Adina Bar Shalom, the founder of the first academic college for ultra-Orthodox women in Jerusalem. Very interesting. She's married actually to Rabbi Ezra Bar Shalom, the former Chaver Bet Din of the Upper Bet Din of Israel. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef lived between 1947 to 2013. He was also a politician in the Knesset, an Israeli rabbi. I think he was in the Knesset between 1984 to 1988. And he's actually the father. He's a very, very great rabbi. and he is actually the father of Rabbi Yonatan Yosef, if I'm not mistaken, who's also a rabbi and a former spokesman of the Jewish settlers, or Sheikh Jar, if I'm not mistaken, and a member of the Jerusalem City Council since 2018. Another one of his daughters, Malka Sassoon, who would be a nursery teacher for 30 years. Rabbi Avram Yosef, born in the year 1947, was the chief rabbi of Holon and a Sephardic representative on the Chief Rabbinic Council, Moatzot Rabbanot Harishit. Yafa Cohen is his fifth child, I believe. I think we're going by order here of date. Chacham Yitzchak Yosef, the former chief rabbi, also known as the Rishon LeZion in Israel, and he, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Chazon Ovadya, and author of the Yalkut Yosef, let's just say halachic books. Another one, Rivka Chikotei, a twin sister of Sarah, is married to Yaakov Chikotei, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Yaakov Chikotei, who's one of the chief rabbis of Modi'in Maccabim Ruth. Then his daughter Sarah, Rabbanit Sarah Toledano, a twin sister she is of Rivka, and is married to Mordechai Rav Mordechai Toledano, the head of Yeshivat Yabiyoma, the Beit Midrash, and Ab Bet Din in Jerusalem. You can see the descendants became very, very great. Rav David Yosef, obviously the current chief rabbi of Israel. He was appointed on September 29th in 2024, and the chief neighborhood rabbi of Har Nof, also very prominent positions, and was appointed, I think, at one stage in time earlier as a Moatzot Chachmei HaTorah after his father passed away. Now, Leah Butbol is another one of his daughters, and Rab Moshe Yosef, married to Yehudit, Rabbanit Yehudit, and he's the head of the Badatz Bet Yosef Kashrut Agency and the head of the Maor Yisrael Talmud Torah, and which also, I believe, publishes the works of his father. Now, we're going to explore more within regards to him. He resided in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Har Nof. He would wear tinted eyeglasses in many of the later pictures, as we see, and his eyes were reported over to have been very sensitive to light. That's what's actually just using Wikipedia. He was referred to as a Posek Hador, the Posek of that present generation, the Gadol Hador, the greatest generation, and the Ma'or Yisrael, the light of Israel, and also popularly known as Maran. Now, I think in 2013, he had unfortunately collapsed during Shacharit at his synagogue in Har Nof, and that would obviously bring about health problems. And September 21st, 2013, he had a worsening of health, if I'm not mistaken, and sadly, I think he passed away on October the 7th, 2013. Now, it's reported over that his funeral was the largest funeral in Jewish history. An estimated 850,000 people came over there. So this was possibly the largest ingathering of Jews since the time period of the second Bet HaMikdash, some places would say. What would they actually speak about? And let's say chronicle over. Now, let's explore some of his halachic workings in of itself. The meta halacha, Rabbi Yosef made use of the slogan of Lachsi Atara Liushana as a metaphor embodying both his social and halachic, let's just say, targets of restoring the past glory. On a social level, let's say it was more widely seen as a call to agenda that will restore the pride of Mizrahi Jews, which might have been lacking at that point in time. There was discrimination, I think, which was reported over against Mizrahi Jews by other sectors. From a halachic perspective, let's just say, it's widely agreed by rabbis and secular researchers alike that the crown or metaphor refers to the halachic supremacy which Rabbi Ovadya Yosef attaches to the rulings of the Rabbi Yosef Karo, Maran, also known as the author of the Code of Jewish Law. According to Rabbi Yosef's approach, Hacham Yosef Karo is crowned as a Mara Da'atra of the land of Israel, and thus all Jewish people living within his realm of authority should be bound by his rulings. Rabbi Yosef actually, I think, says this in the Yalkut Yosef, if I'm not mistaken, in strong terms. It's reported over. So from a halach, yes, that's very interesting. Even if 100 achronim disagree with him, this was quoted over, no teacher is permitted to rule with chumrah, contrary to Moran's instructions to rule leniently. That's what's reported over. Even if many disagree with Moran, and it is not even permitted to act with chumrah, where Moran has ruled leniently, let's just say. He's a Marad Da'atra, stated over, we have received his instructions, we're determined, as halacha to Moshe from Sinai, which there's no dispute, and he who deviates, right, or left dishonors his teachers over there. So that's very interesting. So that's things that yeah. And so there's much chronicled over, about his approach, let's just say, itself. And I think there's a famous Rabbi Ratzon Alevi Arutzi, who's chief rabbi of Kiryat Ona, also would analyze maybe or able to see and distinguish, let's just say, within regards to the Kavanah, let's just say, in some of his rulings. And it's actually written over a quote within regards to the unity of Israel is desirable and shall be achieved by a unified system of halachic ruling, Jewish law ruling, a unified system of halachic ruling. So it has to be consolidation around the tradition of the land of Israel, which he thinks is tradition of Sephardim to rule, as does Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch, and much more he said about that. So very, very interesting. Some people would say that Rabbi Ovadya Yosef adopted more of a melting pot approach, in that he seeks to unify the traditions of all Jews in Israel. Some people would hold that, let's just say. And I think someone named Tzvi Sohar, someone that is able to investigate all these things, that's what he is pointing out. So very, very interesting, let's just say. Okay, now, much is chronicled over within regards to him. It is quite late, but with so much we can say about Chacham Yosef Ovadya is one of the great rabbis of his time. And let's talk about more. He would sometimes prefer, to go on the lenient approach. The power of leniency is greater. Therefore, one of his fundamental principles, I think, of halachic decisions is that lenient rulings should be preferred over a chumrah, something that's more strict. Rabbi Ovadya Yosef saw this one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Sephardic approach to halacha compared to the Ashkenazic approach. In one of his rulings, he quotes Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azila saying, the Chidah, the Sephardim are characterized by the quality of kindness and therefore are lenient in halacha. Ashkenazim have a quality of power and therefore they would rule more strictly. And he says, one is asked a question on a ritual halachic matter and succeeds in proving that the lenient position is a correct one from a halakhic point of view. He sees this as a positive achievement. Now, I think in his opinion, it's a very interesting. He would see, it's quoted over here, that the severity of Ashkenazi poskim, it results from their method of teaching and a lack of familiarity with the Mishnah, let's just say, the Talmud and poskim. That's his opinion. In the 1970 article, Chacham Ovadya Yosef wrote about, would start writing with regards to Rabbi Yaakov Shaul Elisha, who I believe was chief rabbi, if I'm not mistaken, between the years 1893 to 1906. He writes, it's written here, but since the Ashkenazim are cautious in their teaching, they do not rule halacha the maisa, practical halacha. That's what the feedback he was giving, especially on matters of new developments or new technologies which create halachic problems. It is far from them to be interested and express their view of the Torah. And he quotes over here, our rabbi, the Gaon Rabbi Yaakov Shaul Elisha, was among those very few virtuous ones who took upon themselves his burden to resolve the actual problems of his time. And among them, I believe, are some which are relevant to this day and did not avoid answering the questionnaire. Now, Rabbi Ovadya Yosef is regarded ruling with severity as especially, in certain aspects, I should say, in of itself. Very interesting. So he had interesting books. Now, examples of lenient rulings that's permissible for boys and girls to study together up to the age of 9. That was one of his rulings reported over. I'm not sure the source of it. So that widows of IDF soldiers, even unrecoverable soldiers, would not be unable to remarry. This is one of the things that this has to be sourced, remember, and looked into properly over here. So me just saying this over probably is not... it's featured in various different articles over there. And many other examples. He speaks about the mamzer, that when investigating whether a person might be a mamzer, as much plausible deniability as possible ought to be granted, so as to avoid condemning the person to this specific status, let's just say. He tried to mix observance of mitzvot among with as many Israelis as possible. He really tried to do a huge amount of kiruv work and really tried to mitchazek the country, and what a job he did. It's evident, for example, a number of his rulings providing kashrut certification to a restaurant that serves milk and meat, the slaughter of a chicken where there is a concern of it being a treifa, and the wearing, let's just say, of pants of women, let's just say, trousers, Turning a blind eye. Rabbi Ovadya Yosef applied a policy of turning a blind eye to deviations from the halacha in circumstances where a strict adherence to the halacha were required. It is likely that it would not be followed at all. Now, there's various examples. For example, the priestly benediction by the Kohanim, the high priests, who don't have very interesting shliach tzibur, and the Torah reading, let's just say. No, but so it's obviously the Talmud will become very important at that point in time. So he would have attitude to Kabbalah. He was willing to accept rulings which rely on the rulings of the famous Arizal, a great Kabbalist in of itself. In some instances, I think in Jewish prayer, for example, Rabbi Yosef actually championed Kabbalistic considerations, even at the expense of Rabbi Yosef Karo's rulings, as reported over here, in regards to some, much more importances. I think they say Rabbi Ovadya Yosef's attitude towards the Kabbalah, the rulings of the Arizal, and consequently the rulings of the Ben Shai, had been the cause of strong disagreements between him and Jewish immigrants from the Muslim world, if he had some, especially Jews from Iraq. And I think especially it was the rulings of the Ben Shai which was at the heart of the disagreement. And let's just say he would have robust debate. I think the chief rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak Nissim, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, would be speaking, I think, about this also, speaking about him. Now, his attitude towards minhag and traditions, he gave strong preference to the written word and did not attribute significant weight to minhagim and traditions, which aren't anchored, let's just say, in halacha. For example, he expressed opposition to two minhagim observed in synagogues of North African Jewry. For example, standing during the reading of the Ten Commandments, the Aseret HaDibrot, and the involvement of the congregation in certain parts of the prayer service. His attempts, let's say, to change popular and deeply rooted traditions led to opposition to his approach among some North African rabbis over there. So much can be said within regards to that. For example, Breslov Hasidim have the custom of going on a pilgrimage to the tomb of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov in Uman for Rosh Hashanah, and Rabbi Ovadya Yosef had been highly critical of this practice and stated, actually, there are here in Israel the tombs of the greatest sages in the world. The holy Tanaim, let's say, amongst even the least, was able to form, let's just say, resurrection, dead quoted over here. They leave and shame these geniuses that got on him by going to Uman. So attitude of his towards Eretz Israel, let's just say, Ethiopian Jews, first of all. He had an attitude, he regarded them as a pivotal force behind bringing Ethiopian Jews to Israel. He did. Rabbi Ovadya Yosef very much was the pivotal force in bringing them back. I think in the 1970s, Rabbi Ovadya Yosef ruled that Ethiopian Jews were halachically Jewish and campaigned for the Ethiopian Aliyah to Israel, if I'm not mistaken. His attitude to Zionism, he very, very interesting. Many religious Zionists reported over here, just reading Wikipedia, in contrast, view Israel as a first flowering of the redemption. In a halachic ruling, let's just say Israeli Independence Day, Rabbi Ovadya Yosef acknowledged, let's say, that the Jewish people experienced a miracle with the establishment of the state of Israel. However, since the miracle did not include all of the Jewish people, if the congregation wishes to say Hallel without a blessing after a prayer service, they should not be prevented. Now, Rabbi Ovadya Yosef's position could be seen as a middle ground between religious Zionists, in aspects for whom saying Hallel is compulsory, and the Ashkenazi Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, who don't say Hallel at all. Now, very interesting. He would give a newspaper interview, I think, very much. He would actually go over where they're talking about Zionists and anti-Zionists, about family members. What is an anti-Zionist was actually the question posed to him. It's a lie. It's a term that they have concocted themselves, and stating he was 10 years chief rabbi of the state of Israel, respectively. I think in the year 2010, Rabbi Yosef and the Shas, Moatzat Chachmei Torah, the Council of the Sages, approved Shas memberships in the WZO, the World Zionistic Organization, making Shas the first officially Zionistic Haredi, ultra-Orthodox party in Israel. Now, much more can be said about many other things, about the legal system in Israel, he speaks very much about. He was opposed to bringing civil action in Israeli courts because they decide outcomes by applying Israeli law rather than Jewish law. His opposition, I think, is consistent actually with the Ashkenazic Haredi rabbis and some religious Zionist rabbis. For example, Rabbi Yaakov Ariel, as let's just say, who was a former chief rabbi, if I'm not mistaken, of the city of Ramat Gan and one of the co-founder of Gush Emunim. Let's report over. It's a very, very interesting. In matters of criminal law, Rabbi Ovadya Yosef reports over is among the moderate rabbinic voices who support the application of the rule. There's a Dina Malchuta Dina. That's a rule that's given. I think come February 1999, it would give some criticism of the Supreme Court. And obviously would not serve in it. He would serve in the Jewish courts at a later stage. That's something I have to point out over here from the outset. So, yeah, very interesting. So, legal system, they actually give a quotation. These call themselves the Supreme Court. It states that they're worthless. They should be put into a bottom court. For them, God created all of the torment in the world. Let's just say, everything that the people of Israel suffer from is just, let's say, these evil people, empty and reckless, he would say. What do they know? One of our children of 7 to 8 years knows better than they how to learn Torah. These are the people who have been put in the Supreme Court, who choose them, who made them judges, but the justice minister, the persecutor and enemy, he liked them and he recommended that the president would appoint them as judges over here. What were their elections? And that's an important question over here, which I recommend everyone to actually look into over here. Now, there was the movement for quality government in Israel. I think a petition against the Supreme Court of Israel, demanding that Rabbi Ovadya Yosef be put even in a trial. You can see, wow, over there. So that's very interesting. So that's very, very harsh. Yeah. Political activity, as I said before, in 1990, he used his position as a Shas spiritual leader to pressure Yitzhak Shamir into agreeing, holding negotiations with Arab states for peaceful settlement of the Arab-Israeli, let's say, conflict over there. So the biography is Ben Porat Yosef, if I'm not mistaken. The relationship between the two had never been comfortable because of, I think at that point in time, Yitzhak Shamir was Prime Minister of Israel, and unstudious personality he had, if it's reported over, within regards to that point in time. But nevertheless, he does become a great Rabbi Ovadya Yosef does, at a later stage in time. Yeah. I think in 2004, one of the newspapers, the Ma'ariv one, he's listed as one of the most influential rabbis in Israel. And there's a whole description about his brilliance over there. Just checking at the moment. Friends, I think what we're going to do is to continue tomorrow. This because it's getting quite late. There's a lot we have to do. So there'll have to be a part 2 with regards to Rabbi Ovadya Yosef. So watch this space, take care, and thanks for watching. Thank you.